I'm really excited for Visions of Mana. So I went on a marathon of Mana. I beat 11 Mana games in 2 months. And the grand question is, was it worth my time? Well, yes, but there are some caveats galore. It's certainly an uneven series, and I would suggest a handful of the Mana games to most players. But just to sort of kick things off, I'll briefly touch on my history from the early 90s, common threads of Mana across the different games, each game's strengths and weaknesses, and of course, how the Marathon of Mana affects my expectations for Visions of Mana coming out really soon. And also, I also want to touch on just what it felt like playing these games in such a short amount of time as well, because like it takes a bit of like over 160 hours of streaming in 2 months, so it's a bit of a physical endeavor as well. So just to touch on my history real quick, I've been a lifelong fan of Secret of Mana and Trials of Mana, having played them multiple times. I've always loved the verdant, colorful action RPG antics and the whimsical characters, but I was fairly rusty on the rest of the Mana series, not having played many of these games for over 20 years, and 3 of these 11 games I hadn't actually finished before, so I want to actually get even, finish Dawn of Mana, Heroes of Mana, and Adventures of Mana, the 3 that I had not done. These Mana games are really renowned for their presentation of music, and so it was interesting seeing how they play off of established tropes and recurring tropes. What defines a Mana game? There are some common threads, and generally speaking, I would say a Mana game is an action RPG with verdant, colorful aesthetics, well-crafted tunes, really catchy music, and whimsical spirits and monsters. And the games almost always involve elementals and the mana tree, and some games deviate from the norm. We'll get to those shortly. And I sort of split like these 11 games into 4 different eras. We all know of Collection of Mana on the Nintendo Switch and the World of Mana project, but these 4 categories help sort things in my brain, and we're excluding the 4 mobile games since those servers are toast now, unfortunately. So we have the 90s, right? The first 3 games have a sweeping linear journey. You're always moving across from a whole variety of locales to achieve your objective, and the stakes escalate as you play through the games. There's often a sense of building up to a climax. You start off traversing via humble means, via foot. Sometimes you get water travel, and then eventually you'll be able to, in some cases you'll be able to fly, right? So that's like the ultimate cool like thing in these games. You get to like fly in the back of Flammy, which is iconic in the series nowadays. There's often a sense of increasing danger as the antagonist grows in power and wants to take the mana tree for themselves. And these first 3 games, Final Fantasy Adventure, Secret of Mana, and Trials of Mana, they really balance visuals, audio, and playability and fun. That like these are maintained in relative equal measure. You get like the whole package, and they're not perfect packages by any stretch of the imagination. They have some quirks and things that like ever so slightly bog down the experience, but in general speaking, all 3 of these games are really fun and memorable, right? The early 2000s, we have another era though. The second 3 games, I've described them as a fractured journey. And so what do I mean by that? Legend of Mana, Sword of Mana, and Children of Mana have a disjointed feel to them, right? Legend of Mana epitomizes this because there's no actual connection between any of the locations that you set up. The artifacts appear on the map, and like you can kind of just do it in any sort of given position or order that you want, right? So like literally like Fractured, the world doesn't really exist. You're building it from scratch however you wish. So there's no actual like physical connection between any of these spots. They're just spots on a grid, right? But what I didn't really realize is that Sword of Mana also has a similar sense of disjointedness, as really ultimately you have to like pick through options on a menu. It's the first time there's like a menu where you pick things to travel from, and then Children of Mana like further continues that. That game has no overworld. You're just like literally picking spots on the map, right? So like they're visually disjointed, right? And furthermore, all 3 of these games actually have subquests galore, which is something that I forgot about. Legend of Mana is arguably just some quest, a video game. It's just a laundry list of things to do, and there's not really a primary sort of like quest. You're sort of going off all sorts of different sort of objectives, and you don't even have to do all of it. You don't have to do the majority of it to beat the game, technically, right? And then, insofar as Sword goes, there's a sense of disjointedness because they threw in a bunch of Legend of Mana fan service. There's a Cactus Hut, the Legend of Mana Hut, as I have affectionately called it, right? And you go into this Legend of Mana Hut and meet the Legend of Mana NPCs and do some things to buff your journey and whatever, some such, right? And Children of Mana is also sort of disjointed in a manner of speaking, because even though that game's locations revisit established names for Final Fantasy Adventure and the like these areas have no connection. There's not really a sense of a world. You just have a hub, and then you go to a spot and you're like traversing floors, so it's like kind of the areas don't really feel like they have much of a connection, if any, at all. So I've again, like, these three games that have that sense of disjointedness, right? The next sort of area that I would like to touch on is the mid-2000s, the duology of Daphnis and Darkness, Dawn of Mana and Heroes of Mana. And these are super oddball experimental games. Having a third-person character action game and a real-time strategy in like a series known for its RPGs is like really, really weird. I personally don't really think of Dawn of Mana as much of an RPG at all. We could get into the weeds on that one, but it just doesn't really feel like it. There's not really a sense of progression. Your stuff like resets all the time. And really, ultimately, it's kind of about navigating levels. It's like a certain small set of stages, but those stages like drag on a while as well. And both these games are all about darkness. They spam darkness like everywhere. It's a bit of a downer. They kind of are a little contrary to mana tropes in some ways. Like, these games are known for vibrancy and colorful action, and these games get a little depressing sometimes just from how dark everything is. But and for some reason, as a tangent, both of them incidentally rank your performance. They both have grades as you finish stages, so it's like, is that really necessary in this series? It feels a little disjointed. And the balance of fun and aesthetics is even like more skewed than the previous 6 games. And the audio isn't even that memorable and all that. So these are the 2 games that kind of deviate from the norm. They are a bit like funky in that respect, right? Yeah. So, and then we have the late 2010s to 2020. Those last 3 games are remakes of the first 3, jumping platforms from mobile / PlayStation Vita all the way to PS4, Nintendo Switch, and Steam. We have Adventures of Mana, Secret of Mana Remake, or Secret of Mana 2018, and Trials of Mana Remake, or Trials of Mana 2020. And these 3 games are really, really wonderful to play, and they kind of mark a sort of shift from playing a bit safe and staying one-to-one with the original experience to really providing something that keeps the spirit of the original without being so one-to-one. So it's really incredible seeing like that jump. There are 11 games. They each have strengths and weaknesses. If we try to like list them all off, we'd be here all day. But ultimately, to really summarize things really, really quick for the audience, Final Fantasy Adventure has a snappy simplicity, but the dungeons are kind of rote. Secret of Mana has an empowering variety of skills, but the mechanics are kind of broken. Trials of Mana has enchantingly varied characters and world building. It's really cool seeing that triangle story play out and seeing your characters interact. But the implementation of certain concepts is kind of busted. And what do I mean by that? Well, I don't think critical hits work, and this program's a little weird, and the game balance gets a little inconsistent and uneven sometimes, particularly as you approach the end, so you have to kind of grind a bit. That's sort of known for that, but I don't personally mind the grind too much, but it is a thing to be aware of. Legend of Mana. Oh, where do we start with Legend of Mana? It has fun characters, but the pacing is shot. Sword of Mana. It has beautiful environments, but the dialogue and the flow are completely shot. Children of Mana. The gem customization leads to fun opportunities to bolster your character, but the dungeon progression is pretty droll. Dawn of Mana. Oh, Dawn of Mana. Oh, Dawn of Mana. We had a fun time with this one on the air. I can't throw enough air quotes around that one, but it has vibrant character models. The character models look really good, whether it's the elemental spirits or whether it's the NPCs or whether it's the characters. It's really, really impressive for 2006 visually. Surely I believe that. Except maybe the environments in the second half of the game. But the character models are fantastic. What about the rest of it? The levels and the controls feel bad. Heroes of Mana, the Steam's real-time strategy game from 2007. The areas are incredibly vibrant. It's really nice seeing Trials of Mana assets implemented in low poly 3D. It's really charming in that respect. However, that pathfinding feels bad, man. It really, really does. Adventures of Mana, the remake of Final Fantasy Adventure. The quality of life flow is super, super impressive. Whether it's the auto-filling items, the actual existence of a map with labels, whether it's the shortcuts feel so good to use, and so the game builds upon the original experience just so fantastically well. And I never in 1,000 years thought like I'd be that into it. But there's a reason why I wasn't sure about why I was going to be into it. The environments are hysterically low poly. These environments are kind of embarrassing. And that is the thing that kind of gives this game a bit of a rep. If you can look past those environments, you're good. The character models are pretty nice. Those environments, though, don't worry about it too much. Secret of Mana 2018. This is such a one-to-one game, so it's kind of interesting to try to like talk about, but the movement is brisk, so you get to like run around without expending all your stamina to do one linear dash. So you run around freely, and the stamina is more lenient, and you're not beholden to where your CPU teammates are at any given time, so you can kind of go wherever you want. The free movement is nice, right? What about the rest of it? The environments and cutscenes are super sparse. So like I actually like the outdoor hand-painted textures and the outdoor environments, but those cutscenes, they kind of get up close to these models when it doesn't really feel like they should be up close. So yeah, and the indoor environments, the indoor environments. Trials of Mana 2020. The action is really free-flowing, and the characterization is bolstered in a really fascinating way. So like just the way they like communicate between each other in the middle of, like after combat and like between scenes, like they add so much life to the way they do stuff. And the game just feels good to play. It's all about how like seamless it feels, right? What about the rest of it? The post game is pretty copy pasta life, so you don't have. It's like kind of a minor complaint, and also like the music is pretty. It plays it too safe, right? The ranges are really, really safe, but it's those are relatively minor complaints for what is otherwise a pretty baller game. But yeah, those are sort of like the cliff notes, those are sort of like the super quick versions of the pluses and minuses of these games. Why did we play all 11 of these? Why did I do this to myself? Why did I do 160 plus streaming hours? That is the eternal question. But I really want to reevaluate everything. I want to know if I still felt the same way about some of these games. I've played Secret of Mana Super Nintendo like multiple times. Trials of Mana Super Nintendo like way too many times, like a bunch of times. But for the rest of these titles, it's been a hot minute. It's been a long time. I haven't really done Final Fantasy Adventure since like the mid-90s. Legend of Mana not since the Summer of Adventure in 2000. Sword of Mana not since 2003, so on and so forth. So I haven't really touched some of these since they came out, so I want to know, do I still like them or not? And to say, well, the first three, I feel the same way as I ever have. Those are really solid games. Final Fantasy Adventure, Secret, and Trials, those are still like really solid games, right? But for the rest, it gets a little mixed. So like Legend of Mana I was actually looking forward to. I was expecting to like it a lot more than I did, but it is notably a bit underwhelming relative to what I was expecting, because I actually did play it a lot at the time, right? But just stuff like the movement in battle, the inability to run from battle, like just like sort of the lag when you do skills, like it doesn't really feel like the best to play. And furthermore, you're not really incentivized to like learn the game, because you could just like press normal attack and like stun lock everything. So it's kind of like, yeah, it's there's a lot of copy pasta in like the dungeons. Like they clearly spent a lot of love making the Legend of Mana look super polished in terms of like the watercolor aesthetic, but it's just, I wish it were more fun to play. And like a lot of the items that you pick up, it's like they feel like kind of throwing darts against the wall, so it's kind of, that part really got to me, right? As for the rest, I actually really liked Sword more than I thought I would. I love the dungeon design of that game. I already knew the dialogue was going to be a bit of a downer, but what I hadn't really realized was that it was much longer than I had remembered. So I always remembered like the end game dialogue, but I didn't really remember like the rest of it being like, it's just saying too much, right? And it breaks the flow of the game because it's talking too much. It doesn't stop talking. That's like the big thing. And as for Children of Mana, is like, I remember being pretty like dull, but I actually did think it was slightly better than I had remembered. I didn't really realize that it copy pastas so much background stuff from previous games. It has like remixed environments from Trials of Mana and sprites borrowed from Trials of Mana, so it's like, it's a fun little remix project in some regards. It's just that, yeah, like, it runs 30 frames a second. It's like kind of, the actions that you have at your disposal are pretty basic, so it's not like the most exciting game on the face of the planet. But the gem system is fun. Like when you get better and better gems, it feels pretty baller in that regard, right? So there is that. Furthermore, I enjoyed the first half of Dawn of Mana just enough that I liked it more than I was expecting. But then the second half delved into depths that I wasn't really expecting. Like the platforming does not feel good whatsoever. You're sliding off of the tops of roofs. You're getting knocked off of these roofs by like random projectile dudes you may or may not be able to actually see. So it's just stuff like that. It really adds up. Like if any one of these things in Dawn were like in isolation, I would have been fine with it. But like as a totality, it's too much. It is way too much. So it's too much of a mental load. You have to worry about your ammo numbers and the bosses in the second half. Like all the bosses at the end of Dawn of Mana, they run, they be running, and like all the other rest of the guys, they're not like the most fun bosses in the face of the planet. For a series that's kind of known for its fun bosses, Dawn of Mana's bosses aren't really it, unfortunately. Though there's like some stuff early on that's kind of nice, but like yeah, everything the second half, it kind of jumps the shark, unfortunately. Heroes, I wanted to see the Trials of Mana fan service. It is a fanfic in many senses of the word, though not actually a fanfic, of course, but it certainly feels like one. It's sort of a funky game, and you know, I don't regret it, but it's just, there are potential narrative implications that it brings up, but they don't really have the most payoff on the face of the planet, hence the fanfic designation there. And then as for the other three, I personally wanted to play the originals and the remakes to experience how different they feel from each other. So I wanted to re-experience the differences of how the remakes are balanced relative to those original games, and sort of build a greater appreciation for the changes they make. So obviously I really like the changes that Adventures of Mana does from a UI perspective, and then Secret of Mana doesn't really do as much as I would have liked. It like underutilizes those controls in a way that kind of gets on me a little bit. And as for Trials of Mana, like I really greatly appreciate, even more so, it's my third playthrough through the Trials remake. I really appreciate like all the different skills that they add and all the abilities and all the little tweaks and getting you on your feet faster. All the systems from before are just amplified in a really meaningful way. It's just that the bosses don't quite hit the same way. The bosses aren't quite as hard, and the fear isn't quite as prevalent in the Trials remake, because like the game's a little handholdy, right? So I mean, like I think that's fine, but relative to the original game, like Trials remake definitely like it's a smoother ride in general speaking, right? And the really big thing leading to Visions is that I wanted to grasp the aesthetic growth of this series over time. So 2016, super low poly, meant for like a Vita or like a phone. 2018, like it's starting to get a little more higher fidelity, but still ultimately constrained by, you know, the Vita hardware to a degree. So far as Trials goes, that really does genuinely feel like a game that has aged marvelously. It runs very well on current hardware. It feels like just as fresh as it ever did in 2020. It is fantastic. But yeah, again, this remake era plays it pretty safe, and then the Trials remake takes a lot of bold risks that keep the spirit of the original game, so it's really nice. Which games would I recommend? The easiest thing to say is just play Collection of Mana on Nintendo Switch, right? But in an ideal case, I would suggest playing Adventures of Mana, the remake, Secret of Mana 93, the Super Nintendo game, and the Trials remake. Those three will probably give you the best impact for your time. But if you don't mind like strange technical quirks, or some sparse environments, or some kind of slapdash cutscenes, or if you really want voiceover, then go ahead and do Secret of Mana 2018. But in general speaking, the original game will probably provide more of an emotional impact on you. The rest of the games are not like necessary plays, or they're difficult to access anyway. But yeah, if you want to do some extra credit homework, you could dive into like Sword of Mana or Children of Mana, but they're kind of like harder to access. And if Sword of Mana does happen to show up on like Nintendo Switch Online or something like that, then go ahead and give it a shot. Just beware that the dialogue might drive you a little batty, given the fact that it just takes so long. But what does any of this mean for Visions of Mana? What does it mean? What does all this amount to? Well, mechanically speaking, the bar has been set by the Trials remake, right? It has to nail that brisk flow, that quick action, that sort of like really seamless progression of traversing these areas and like bolstering your characters and using your skills on all that stuff, right? And it has to nail that brisk flow. It's really important. It also seems like the level of customization is there from all evidence. It feels like Visions of Mana has this customization. I haven't really read, like, I haven't watched everything. I'm trying to keep it relatively fresh, so I'm not trying to like dive into all of the different like trailers and stuff and like analyze them. So I'm trying to like keep some of it fresh, but I have seen that there's some pretty extensive customization in there. And so far, it also seems like the 5 playable characters have a model after Trials like archetypes. So like some of the skill sets seem familiar. And you know, modeling yourself after Trials of Mana, my personal favorite of the whole bunch, it perhaps means you can't really go wrong, right? So, but insofar as the rest of the series is concerned, what can we glean? Well, the elementals are back in full force. The classes seem really tied to that in a really fascinating, interesting way. And again, some of those have some crossover with Trials in terms of like the class names, but the implementation and the visual appearance is like completely different. So it's really promising and fun. The elementals might have some fun personalities again. Like they differ a little bit from game to game. Like Dryad and Salamander are kind of similar across games, but in general speaking, like it's always really fun seeing how they communicate. There are some massive disparities among the elementals' portrayal in some games. Gnome is like this fatherly figure in Heroes of Mana for some reason. Gnome gets like super top billing, but they're like happy-go-lucky otherwise in most of the other games. But for some reason in Heroes of Mana, they're like this big like super fatherly sort, and it's like, okay, that's interesting. And then there's some funny sequences in Sword of Mana and Heroes of Mana where like Lumina and Shade have these spats. So I kind of wonder if that sort of stuff is gonna come back. But Children of Mana and Dawn of Mana, like all of the elementals have like a campfire-esque camaraderie. They have like this, they communicate all together, so it makes you wonder to what degree like they're actually going to like interact like that in Visions. I really want to know like how they're going to play it up, because there's different avenues. Like Sword of Mana has like these elementals kind of just existing on their own, but in certain games they really do like come together, right? So I'm really curious. But yeah, now we can sort of dive into the actual act of streaming these games, the physical toll. So again, that was 30 streams over 8 weeks. I did not do a single weekend stream. I wanted to keep my sanity. So even though like again, like I have played most of these games before, I was pretty rusty and I didn't really know how long they were necessarily going to take. I was expecting to take more time on Trials of Mana Remake, and I was expecting to take a little longer at Adventures of Mana, but I wasn't quite expecting Dawn of Mana to take like 4 days. I was kind of hoping. Yeah, 162 hours of streaming in 2 months. Like, I don't know if I'm ever gonna like go jump off the chain like this ever again. Partially just because like I have to really enjoy what I'm doing to like stream that long, right? And that's the thing. To anybody like who's kind of curious about the Sword project, you have to love what you're doing. You have to absolutely love playing it. It has to feel seamless. You can't feel frustrated. If every game were like Dawn of Mana or if every game were like Heroes, it would be a bit of a problem, to be entirely honest with you. But fortunately, the other 9 didn't really wow me too much. But I did get something out of all 11 games. Each of the 11 games did have something worth talking about. So there was that. But yeah, man. Honestly, like, I certainly enjoyed doing this whole rigmarole. So, but yeah, like, that's a lot of hours, right? So, I mean, if you split 162 divided by 30, that is 5.4 hours on average per day. 5.4 hours per day. That's a lot of hours. I think most of our friends like to do more like 3 to 4. So, like, you gotta be really committed to the bit, and it's a lot of hours, and it ain't easy. You really have to like love what you're doing. You have a goal in mind, but I want to build the visions, and I just love the series so much. It's inspired all my visual motifs, so I had to do it, right? So I had to do it. I thoroughly enjoyed streaming the Mana series, and I hope this look back was interesting for you guys. I'm super excited for Visions of Mana. It looks incredibly promising, and I hope it plays well. Thanks for watching. This has been Vin. Please follow for more Verdant Joy, and we'll see you on the next one.